My name is Miles Werner. I am 32 years old, and I have been to exactly one wedding in my life. My own. I left before the cake was cut. I still remember the weight of that room pressing against my chest. 500 people, white tablecloths stretching as far as I could see, flowers taller than some of the guests, a band playing something soft in the corner, trying to make everything feel elegant and controlled. My father stood about 10 feet away from me in a rented suit he had pressed himself that morning, wearing shoes he had shined by hand. Then I heard 3 words spoken into a live microphone in front of every person who mattered to my family, and something inside me went very still. Not angry, still. That stillness is what I want to tell you about, because what I did next cost me the future I thought I was building, but what happened after gave me something I never realized I had almost lost. Let me take you back to October 14th, the morning of the day I almost made the worst mistake of my life. I grew up in a house on Fernwood Drive in Dayton, Ohio. From the outside, there was nothing special about it. It was a single-story ranch house with dark green shutters and a front lawn my father kept short enough that the neighbors never had anything to say about it. The kitchen smelled like coffee from about 5 in the morning until noon, because Howard Werner was the kind of man who started his day before the rest of the world woke up. My father was not a big talker. He wore flannel most of the year, drove a 2009 Honda Accord with a small dent in the rear bumper that he never bothered fixing, and read an actual physical newspaper every morning at the kitchen table. Not on his phone. Paper. He had a routine, and he kept it the way some men keep their word, quietly, consistently, and without needing anyone to notice. We were not poor, but we were not rich either. The bills got paid. I went to good schools. When I needed something, it was there. When I wanted something unreasonable, my father would look at me over the top of his newspaper and say nothing, which was its own kind of answer. There is one moment I have thought about a lot since everything happened. I was maybe 17. Someone had invited my father to a business conference downtown, some industry event at a nice hotel, the kind of place where men in suits went to feel important. He looked at the invitation, set it on the counter, and said, "No explanation. I did not ask." There was also a corner in the garage with a gray filing cabinet that was always locked. I noticed it 100 times growing up. I never once saw him open it. He was the most private man I had ever known. I used to think that was simply who he was. I was wrong. I met Claire Calloway at an architecture workshop in Columbus in the fall, 3 years before the wedding. She was sharp. She asked questions nobody else thought to ask, and she laughed at the right moments. She had this way of cutting through whatever was complicated and finding the simple thing underneath. I liked her immediately. I liked her for months before I told her. We dated for 6 months before I brought her home to Dayton. That visit went fine. My mother made her feel welcome. My father shook her hand, asked her 2 questions about her work, and then went back to his newspaper. Claire told me later that she thought he was reserved. I told her that was just him. Then she brought me home. Her family lived in Dublin, Ohio, on the east side of Columbus, in the kind of neighborhood where every house had a 3-car garage and a landscaping crew that came on Thursdays. Gerald Calloway worked in commercial real estate. Patricia Calloway ran the household, and from what I could see, most of Gerald's social calendar too. The first time Claire's mother met my father was at a dinner I would rather forget. My father pulled up in his Accord. Claire's eyes went to the car for just a second. It was not a long look, and it was not something she would ever admit to, but I saw it. Then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 18 months after Claire and I started dating, I proposed. We planned the wedding for the following spring. Somewhere in that time, I turned down a senior project manager position in Portland. It was better money, bigger scope, the kind of job I had been working toward. I stayed because Claire was in Columbus, and I did not want to ask her to choose. She never asked me to stay, but she did not tell me to go either. I told myself it was a choice. I did not see yet that it was also a test. The Calloway house was the kind of place that announced itself. High ceilings, framed photographs arranged on the wall in a way that looked casual but clearly was not. A kitchen island large enough to park a car on. Patricia had set the table with actual candles for what was supposed to be a casual Tuesday dinner. I noticed that immediately. Casual dinners do not need candles. Patricia started asking questions before the bread came out. What firm did I work for? How long had I been there? What was the growth path? She was not unfriendly about it. Her voice stayed warm. Her smile stayed in place. But the questions had a shape to them, like a form you fill out to see whether you qualify for something. Gerald mostly talked about wine. He had opinions about what they were drinking. He showed me the label. He did not ask me much about myself. About 20 minutes in, Patricia turned the conversation to family. She asked about my parents. I told her my mother worked part-time in a dental office. Then she asked about my father. I said he was retired. She asked, "Retired from what?" I told her he had owned a business. There was a small pause. She picked up her wine glass and said, "I see." 2 words, perfectly polite, and every person at that table understood exactly what she meant. Derek, Claire's older brother, was 38, broad-shouldered, and had a salesman's handshake. He caught my eye and smiled a little, the way people smile when they want you to know they are in on something you are not. Claire changed the subject. She mentioned a restaurant she had been to recently. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It did not stop after that dinner. Over the 6 months that followed, Patricia developed a talent for landing small cuts in public. At a birthday party for one of Claire's friends, she introduced my parents to someone she knew and said, "These are Miles's parents, Howard and Donna, very salt of the earth people." She said it like a compliment. It was not. Gerald was worse in a different way. He did not bother with the packaging. At a barbecue at their house in late summer, a group of men stood around the grill talking business, and I heard him say, loud enough for it to carry, "Claire has always been independent. She picked a good worker." Not exactly what we hoped for, but then he let the sentence die there. The men around him nodded. I did not say anything that afternoon. That night, I sat down with Claire at the kitchen table and said it plainly. I told her that if her family kept talking about my father the way they did, I needed to know she would say something. Not for me, but for him. She looked at me across the table, and her expression was careful, not defensive, not dismissive. Careful, the way a person looks when she already knows the answer, but is not ready to say it. She told me she would handle it. I want to be clear about something. I did not stay because I was a pushover. I stayed because I had watched my father spend 30 years not asking for anything from anyone, and the least I could do was try to build something with the woman I loved before deciding it could not work. I gave that effort its fair shot. But I had put a line in my head. I had not said it out loud yet. I should have. The bridal shower was about 30 people on a Saturday afternoon at the Calloway house. Catered food, flowers on every surface. The whole thing. My parents came because they were family, and that is what family does. My father wore a sport coat and slacks. He had shined his shoes. He stood beside my mother near the edge of the room and watched everything with the same expression he used to have while watching the evening news. Patient, taking it in, not bothered. Patricia found him within the first 10 minutes. She said his name loudly enough for the cluster of women nearby to hear. Then she asked if he needed a ride home later, saying she could arrange something. She said it with a full smile, the kind that came with its own explanation already built in. She was being helpful. She was being thoughtful. Was she not being generous? My father looked at her for a moment and said, "I'm fine, Patricia. Thank you for the concern." That was all. No edge in his voice. No change in his face. He did not explain that he had driven himself. He did not mention the car. He simply answered and let the silence after his answer do whatever it was going to do. Patricia blinked once and turned away. Even from across the room, I could see that his calm had irritated her more than an argument would have. Later, near the end of the afternoon, I noticed a man I did not recognize. He was in his 50s, well-dressed, one of Gerald's business contacts, and he was looking at my father from across the room. It was not a hostile look. It was more like someone trying to place a face he had seen before. He took out his phone, seemed to think better of it, and put it away. On the drive home, I asked my father if what Patricia had done got to him. He said, "They don't know me, son. That's their problem, not mine." I did not fully understand what he meant. Not yet. 1 week before the wedding, I went to pick Claire up from her parents' house. I let myself in through the side door because she had given me a key months before. Then I heard voices coming from the kitchen. The door was half open. I was not trying to listen, but voices carry. I heard Patricia say, "You could still call this off. Ryan Harrington is a better match. You know that." There was a pause. Then I heard Claire say, "Mom, the wedding is in a week." Patricia answered, "Exactly. There is still time." I stood in that hallway for a few seconds. Then I walked back out the side door and sat in my car. Here is what I knew about the Harringtons. Old Columbus money, commercial real estate. Exactly the kind of family Patricia had been engineering toward for years. I had heard the name once or twice in passing. There was a son named Ryan who had gone to Dartmouth and now ran part of his father's firm. I had never thought much about it. I sat in that car for 20 minutes and went through all of it. What I had heard. What it meant. What I was going to do with it. Then I made the worst decision of that entire year. I went back inside, knocked on the door, and pretended I had not arrived yet. I want to be honest about why I did that. I was not afraid of a fight. I stayed because I needed to know whether Claire was in on it or whether she was just trying to manage her mother. I thought I could find out at the wedding. I thought I would see, in the moment that mattered, which way she would fall. I gave her the benefit of the doubt for 1 more week. I should have known then. Some answers do not need a test. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Upper Arlington. White walls, low lighting. The kind of place where the menu does not have prices because the people who eat there do not ask. Patricia had chosen it. She mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, and once more after the appetizers, that she and Gerald were covering the cost. My parents arrived on time. My father wore his good suit, the gray double-breasted one he kept in a dry cleaning bag in the back of his closet. He looked fine. More than fine, actually. He looked like a man who did not need to dress for anyone but had taken the trouble anyway. Gerald met them near the door. He looked at my father, nodded once, and shook my mother's hand. Not my father's. He just nodded. My mother noticed. I saw her eyes go to her husband's face, checking. My father's expression did not change. Midway through dinner, Patricia stood to say a few words. She thanked the venue, thanked the guests, and said lovely things about Claire. Then she turned slightly toward my parents' end of the table and said, with a warm smile that was doing a lot of work. "We are so glad Miles's family could join us. Howard, it is wonderful that you could make it." She said it like he had traveled from somewhere difficult, like his presence required acknowledgement the way a generous donation might. Under the table, my mother found my hand and held it for a second. I did not look at her. My father picked up his fork and kept eating. At the end of the night, Patricia pulled me aside near the coat check. She looked up at me with an expression of practiced concern and told me she just wanted to make sure tomorrow went smoothly for everyone. Then she said my father might feel a little out of his depth with the kind of guests they were having and that I should manage it if I could. I looked at her for a moment and told her my father had never embarrassed anyone in his life. She smiled and said, "Of course." I did not sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically, but all of it. The way I had let things go on so long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and moving them forward every time someone got close to crossing one. At 1 a.m, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring and asked if I was still up. He said he was not surprised, just checking. I said I was. We did not talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if the hotel room was comfortable. I said it was fine. Then I asked him the thing I had been carrying all day. I asked if he was okay with all of it. There was a pause. I could hear the television on low in his room down the hall. Some nature program, something about water. He told me he was fine. I told him they were not kind to him. He said, "No, they're not." I asked if that did not bother him. It was not quite a question, but he heard it anyway. He said, "People show you who they are. I've seen enough of that to know it doesn't need to bother me." I did not have anything to say to that. Before he hung up, he said something I have turned over many times since. He said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anyone your dignity. Remember that." I told him good night. I lay there for another hour in the dark, running his words back in my mind. He had said whatever happens, not whatever they say, not however it goes. Like he had already mapped something out. But I told myself it was just a father being a father. I was wrong about that too. On the morning of the wedding, my father and I shared the suite the hotel had set aside for the groom's family. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom, standing in front of the bathroom mirror and tying his cravat, rented suit, white shirt, the same shine shoes from the bridal shower. He looked completely at ease. His hands were not shaking. His face had the same expression it always had, open and unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. I asked if he was doing okay. He said, "Always." He glanced at me in the mirror while he straightened the knot and asked if I loved her. I said yes. Then he told me to do what I needed to do that day, not what anyone else needed. I did not know what to do with that sentence. I just nodded. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Derek Calloway. He wrote that Patricia wanted my father seated in the back, less visible, and he added that those were her words. He said he thought I should know. I read the message twice. Derek had sent it in that particular way, some people do, not to help you, but to watch what you do with it, to be part of whatever happened next without taking any responsibility for it. I put my phone in my jacket pocket without answering. My father was at the window then, looking out at the parking lot. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and took something out. It was a plain white legal-size envelope, slightly worn at the corners. He looked at it for a moment, not long, then tapped it once and put it back. He asked if I was ready. I said I was. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. I wish I had asked sooner. The grand ballroom at the Renaissance Columbus could hold 500 people, and that day it held exactly that. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than I was, a string quartet playing near the entrance. It was the kind of room that made everything feel formal before anything had even happened. I found out where they had seated my parents when I walked in with the wedding party. Row 8, left side, partially behind a marble column. From that angle, my parents could see the altar, but no one looking from the altar could easily see them. The Callaways were in row 1. I stood at the altar, looked at that column, and felt something go flat inside me. Not rage. Something quieter. The kind of feeling that comes when you have been telling yourself a story about a person, and then you see clearly that the story was never true. The ceremony started. The quartet played. Claire walked in on Gerald's arm, looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. During the ring exchange, Gerald leaned toward Patricia and said something quietly, but not quietly enough. 2 women in row 2 glanced at each other. I caught one word, worker. Patricia smiled. Then I saw that man again, the one from the bridal shower. I would find out later that his name was Tom Rafter, though I did not know him then. He was at a table near the front with a group of Gerald's business associates. He looked at my father, really looked, the way you look at someone you are trying to place. He took out his phone and held it for a second like he was deciding something. Then he put it away again. He had made his decision. I just did not know yet what it was. The reception started the way receptions do. The room filled with noise. Glasses went up. The band shifted from ceremony music to something with a little more air in it. 500 people talking all at once creates a kind of pressure in a room. It pushes against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my father hold my mother's chair while she sat down. Then he smoothed his jacket and sat beside her. Two people at a table of strangers, perfectly contained. Patricia went first. She stood at the microphone near the head table and spoke for about 6 minutes. She talked about the Calloway family, its history in Columbus, its values, and what Claire meant to them. She was good at this. Her voice had weight. People listened. She did not mention my parents once. Howard and Donna Werner, the groom's parents, did not exist inside Patricia's 6 minutes. Gerald followed with something shorter. He said I was a hard worker. He said the family was glad to welcome me. He said hard worker the way some men say it, not as praise but as categorization, the way you describe something useful that does not require much further thought. There was polite applause. I stood to take the microphone, planning to say something simple, to thank people and move through it. Patricia did not step back. She said, "Oh, we're not done yet," still holding the microphone. Her smile had not changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room. I followed her gaze. She was looking at the table where my father was sitting. I had seen that smile before, in the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner. She wore it when she had already decided something and was arriving at the moment she had planned. I stood very still. The band stopped playing. Maybe someone signaled them, or maybe they simply felt the change in the room. Either way, the music cut, and the silence that came in behind it had weight. Patricia turned slightly toward my father's table. She held the microphone naturally, the way someone holds a thing she has been holding for years. She began by saying she wanted to say something about the Werner family. Her voice was warm and considered, the voice of someone giving a toast at a charity event. She said I came from modest beginnings, and that my father, Howard, had surely done his very best. She paused and let it land. Then, she turned to the woman beside her, one of her friends from the country club, someone I had met twice and never quite caught the name of, and said, still into the microphone, and with her voice unchanged, "That's not a father. That's just trash that showed up." A few people laughed. Short sounds, like reflexes. A larger section of the room went quiet. It was the specific quiet of 500 people deciding what to do with something they had just heard. I turned to Claire. She was looking down at the table. Then, as if she felt my eyes on her, she glanced up. Our eyes met for half a second. At the corner of her mouth, there was a small, involuntary thing. Just a flicker. A smile. Then she looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He had not moved. His hands were flat on the table. His face was something I still do not have a word for, at least not one that is big enough. He looked like a man who had decided, long before this moment, that other people's cruelty was not something that required a response. My mother had a cloth napkin pressed against her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood up. 500 people watched me cross the floor. No one said anything. The room had that held breath quality, where everyone can feel something happening, but nobody knows yet which direction it will fall. I walked to Patricia. She was still holding the microphone. I reached out, and she handed it to me. Not because she wanted to, but because the momentum of the moment made it the only thing that made sense to do. I turned and faced the room. I thanked everyone for coming. I told them I meant that. Then I paused long enough for the pause to have its own shape. I said I was not going to stand there and watch my father be spoken about that way. Not in front of 500 people. Not anywhere. Then I turned to Claire. She was gripping the edge of the table. I reminded her that I had asked her once what she would do if they ever crossed that line. I reminded her that she had said she would handle it. She whispered my name and told me not to. I told her she had smiled. She did not answer. I said, "This wedding is over." Then I set the microphone down on the table beside me. Not dropped. Not thrown. Set down. The way you put something away when you are done with it. Then I did the hardest thing in the room. I said nothing more. No explanation. No argument. No attempt to make Patricia understand, because Patricia was never going to understand, and I was done spending myself on that. Someone near the back said something in a low voice. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I was not angry. I was clear. Those are different things. That difference took me years to learn, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Gerald came out of his seat and pointed at me. The gesture was exactly what you would expect from a man who had made a career of telling rooms what to do. He told me I could not do this and started asking if I had any idea what it would mean. I told him to sit down, quietly, evenly. He did not sit down. Patricia stepped forward. Her composure was still there, but barely. She told me I was embarrassing myself and said we could sit down and talk about it. I told her there was nothing to talk about. Then I turned. My father was standing. He had gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic push of the chair. No announcement. He was just standing there. Jacket straight. Face calm. My mother had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked back at me. I said, "Let's go, Dad." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, simply. The way he nodded when a thing was decided and did not need more discussion. He came around the table. He walked past Patricia without looking at her. Not with contempt. There just was not anything there that required his attention. We moved toward the exit. My mother followed, clutching her small purse, the napkin still in her other hand. 500 people watched us leave. The room was starting to find its noise again, chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning toward each other. In the middle of it all, Patricia Calloway stood near the head table with a microphone she no longer had and a room she no longer controlled. I did not look back at her. Near the front, at a table with Gerald's business associates, Tom Rafter got to his feet. He watched my father walk past. Then he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted and quiet. The sounds of the reception were muffled behind the closed double doors. We stood near the elevator bank. My father, my mother, me, waiting in the particular silence of people who had just walked out of something and had not yet decided what came next. My mother was the first to speak. She said my name, just my name. I told her I knew. The elevator button was still lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. Then a voice came from behind us. Someone said, "Excuse me." We heard quick steps on the carpet and turned. It was the man from the ballroom, the one who had been watching my father. He was breathing slightly fast, like he had come out in a hurry. He asked, "Howard Werner?" My father turned and looked at him for half a second, the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reaction. Then he said, "Tom." They knew each other. Tom Rafter stopped a few feet away. He glanced at me, then back to my father. He apologized for coming out into the hallway that way. He said he had not wanted to say anything in there, but he had been on my father's fund advisory board for 4 years. He said he had not realized my father was connected to me, and he had not put it together until that night. My father said, "This is my son." Tom turned to me and put out his hand. He introduced himself as Tom Rafter and said he ran Bridgewater Growth Fund. Then he told me my father was their largest silent partner. He said they were talking north of $300 million in assets under his advisory. I shook his hand. I am not sure what my face was doing. I said, "What?" My father watched me and said there were things he had never needed me to know until then. We moved down the hall, away from the elevator, to a seating area near a window. My mother sat, my father stood. Tom excused himself after a moment. He had my father's number and said he would be in touch. Then it was just the three of us. My father told me the whole thing. He had started a logistics company in 1994, 2 years before I was born. He had built it from a leased warehouse and one truck. For 25 years, he ran it quietly. No press, no public profile, no industry awards on the wall. He did not want any of that. In 2019, he sold the company to a private equity group for a number he said plainly, once, because I was his son, and he believed I had a right to know, $1.4 billion. He did not change anything after that. Not the house, not the car, not the newspaper. He told me he had wanted me to have a real life, not a gilded one. He said he wanted to know that I would make decisions based on who I was, not what he had. I sat with that for a moment. I started to ask why he had never told me, but I already understood the answer before I finished the question. He said I had not needed it to be who I was. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out the envelope I had seen him hold that morning. He set it on the cushion beside me. He said it was a transfer of assets he had prepared the previous month, a portion in my name. It had been meant as a wedding gift. I did not open it. I just looked at him. He told me I had walked out of that room for him, and that was worth more than anything in the envelope. Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low roar of 500 voices starting to understand what had just happened. Tom Rafter went back into the ballroom. He was not trying to cause anything. He had a client at one of the tables, and he was not the kind of man who made a scene, but he was also not the kind of man who kept something like that to himself when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Business people in the same room tend to know each other, or at least know of each other. The name Howard Werner, if you knew where to look, was attached to a 2019 transaction that had made trade press. Within 15 minutes of Tom going back through those doors, 2 people had searched the name on their phones. Within 20 minutes, the information was moving from table to table in the quiet, purposeful way. Important information moves among people who understand what it means. Gerald's phone buzzed. He looked at it. It was a message from someone who had been at the same table as Tom. 6 words. "Did you know who his dad is?" Gerald stared at the screen. Then he searched the name. The first result was a piece from a logistics industry newsletter about Werner Logistics Group being sold in 2019 for $1.4 billion in a landmark private equity acquisition. He turned to Patricia and showed her the screen without saying anything. She took the phone, read it, looked up, and put the phone down on the table. Around her, the room was still making noise. People at other tables were piecing it together, leaning in, carrying that particular electric hum of a crowd that has realized the story they have been watching is not the story they thought it was. Patricia Calloway sat perfectly still. Her hands were on the table. Both of them were trembling slightly. Derek saw it from 2 seats away. He looked at the screen and said quietly, "Mom." She did not answer him. Claire found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone upstairs. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, looking at nothing in particular. Claire had been crying. Her mascara was intact, because whatever she had done for the wedding held, but her eyes were red, and she had been worrying at the sleeve of her dress. She sat across from me and said she had not known her mother was going to say that. I told her I believed her. She said she had not arranged it, that she had not planned that. I said her name and kept my voice even. I told her she had smiled. She said it had been nerves, a reflex, not what it looked like. I told her I knew, and I did know. I had thought about it in the 40 minutes since it happened, and I understood what kind of smile it was. Not cruel, not deliberate. Just the smile of someone relieved that pressure had finally been released, even if the release was ugly. That was the part I could not get past. I reminded her that I had asked her months earlier. I had told her exactly what I needed. She had looked me in the eye and promised me she would handle it. When the moment came, she looked at the table and smiled. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told me her mother had arrangements with the Harrington family. She said it was not something she was going to go through with, but her mother had kept pushing. I told her I knew about that too. She went still. I told her I had heard the two of them talking in the kitchen a week earlier. The hallway was quiet around us. Far away, through walls, I could hear the muffled sound of a wedding winding down in a way no one had planned. I told Claire I did not think she was a bad person. I told her I thought she was someone who would always choose her family when it counted, and that I could not build a life with someone who looked at my father the way her family did. She did not argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. I told her to take care of herself. Then I picked up my jacket and walked to the elevator. My father's phone rang at 9:17 that evening. He looked at the screen and set it face up on the hotel room's small desk so I could see who was calling. Patricia Calloway. He let it ring twice, then picked up. Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that usually coated everything she said had been stripped out, and underneath it was just a woman who had done the math and arrived at a number she did not like. She called him Mr. Werner and said there might have been a misunderstanding that day. My father told her there was no misunderstanding. Calm, not cold, just finished. He told her she had said what she meant. She started to say that if she had known who he was, and he cut her off. He said, "That's exactly the problem." Then he ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk, looked at it for a moment, and went to the window. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the Columbus skyline, at the office buildings lit up in the dark. I was sitting on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt, watching him. He was not savoring it. There was nothing in his posture that looked like satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who had said what needed to be said and had no interest in saying anything further. After a while, he turned around and asked if I was okay. Then he found the television remote, turned it on, and flipped through channels until he found a program about deep-sea fishing. He sat in the chair by the window. We did not talk much after that. We just sat in the room together, the television on low, the city outside going about its business. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Calloway family that I only pieced together later. Gerald had a commercial real estate deal pending with Bridgewater Growth Fund, a mixed-use development on the east side of Columbus with $2.3 million in financing. He had been moving it toward close for about 4 months. After the wedding, the emails stopped getting answered. Not refused, not denied. Just no response. Gerald's contact at the fund had been promoted. The new person was very polite and very unavailable. The deal went into a review process with no stated timeline. Patricia sat on the advisory board of a local charitable foundation, one of those organizations involved in arts funding, the kind where your name in the program meant something. That fall, she was asked, without much explanation, to step down from the board. The organization's largest anonymous donor had quietly expressed concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. No one told Patricia who the donor was. Gerald lost a client, a referral he had had for 2 years, a family that had bought and sold property through him reliably. Suddenly, they shifted to another agent. He did not find out why. None of them ever knew for certain whether any of it had anything to do with my father. That is the thing about Howard Werner. He did not operate in ways that announced themselves. Things just move the way rivers move because of what is upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this. My father did not plan any of it. He did not set out to ruin anyone. He was just a man who existed in certain spaces, and those spaces had weight. Sometimes that is enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that did not happen, I called the firm in Portland. The position was still open. The hiring manager said he had been hoping I would circle back. I said I was interested. He said they could have an offer out by the end of the week. I thanked him and hung up. That weekend, I drove out to Dayton and told my parents over dinner. My mother made pot roast, which she only made for occasions she felt needed anchoring. My father listened to the whole thing and then said, "You should have taken it 2 years ago." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 3 weeks. It felt like something slowly coming back online. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while my mother washed dishes and my father read the newspaper. The same table I had grown up at, the same kitchen. The window over the sink still had the same curtain from when I was 12. I watched my father's hands on the newspaper. Big hands, the kind that look like they have done actual work, even though the work he had done for most of his life happened in meeting rooms and conference calls. He had built something real, and he had never felt the need to tell anyone about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the bridal shower who looked at his rented suit and decided they knew what he was. I thought about that for a long time. I moved to Portland in November. I took one bag and the envelope my father had given me, which I still had not opened. Portland in winter is gray and wet, and surprisingly easy to disappear into. I liked that about it. I needed some time where nobody knew the story. I found an apartment in the Pearl District. It was small, but it had good light in the mornings and was within walking distance of the office. I bought a coffee maker, put it on the counter, and got back to work. My new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My father flew out in February. He told me he was coming. He did not ask. He just said he would be there on the 14th, and asked whether the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I told him it was fine. He said good. He showed up in the same kind of clothes he always wore, flannel jacket, good boots. He looked at my apartment, nodded slightly, and said, "Nice light." We walked along the waterfront that afternoon, south toward the bridges. It was cold and clear, and the river had that particular flat color it gets in winter. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that has been earned. At some point, I asked him the thing I had been carrying since October. I asked why he had never told me any of it. He walked a few more steps before he answered. He did not seem to be searching for words. He just seemed to be giving the answer its proper amount of space. He said he had wanted to see who I would become without it. I asked what he had seen. He looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you." 3 words. He said them simply and without ceremony, the way he did everything. I did not answer him. I did not need to. We kept walking. The river moved beside us. The city went about its business overhead. There is something I have thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Patricia's face, not the quiet phone call to Portland. Something smaller. The curtain on the kitchen window in Dayton. My parents never replaced it. It was the same curtain I had stared at as a kid while I ate breakfast, faded a little at the top where the sun hit it. My father could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains. He could have replaced the car, the house, the furniture. He had the means to do it twice over and never thought about it once. He was not performing modesty. He was not hiding from anything. He had simply, at some point, decided that the life he wanted to live did not require any of that. And he had lived it completely, without looking over his shoulder to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Claire. Loving her was not the mistake. That was real, and it does not embarrass me. The mistake was staying past the point where the information was clear. I kept offering her the benefit of the doubt because I wanted the story to turn out a certain way. That is something I did, and I own it. What I did not get wrong was the table in that ballroom. I did not get wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. I had been taught my whole life, without quite hearing it, that there are things you do not trade away. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table full of people who have already decided what you are worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in row 8 behind a marble column, in a suit he had rented and shoes he had shined himself. He was the most valuable person in the room. He always had been. People ask sometimes if I regret how it happened, the timing, the room, the 500 people. I do not. Not because of what I found out about my father afterward. Not because of the envelope or Tom Rafter or whatever quietly happened to Gerald's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story. But they are not the reason. The reason is simpler. My father was standing 10 feet away from me when someone called him trash into a microphone. The only question in that moment was what kind of man I was. I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else followed from that. I opened the envelope in my Portland apartment, sometime in March. I will not tell you the number. I sat with it for a while, then folded it back up and put it on the desk. Then I went and made coffee. I stood at my window and watched the street below. My father called that evening. He asked if I had opened it yet. I said I had. He asked what I thought. I told him it was a lot to take in. He said it was mine to do what I wanted with. Then he started talking about a fishing program he had watched the night before. That is Howard Werner. That is who he is. I do not know what happened to Claire. I heard secondhand that the Harrington arrangement never materialized. I wish her well. I mean that sincerely. As for me, I have a good job, a small apartment with good light, and a father I call every few days who still reads a physical newspaper. That is the whole story. I once thought I was walking into a wedding to build a life with someone else. Instead, I walked out of that room with my parents and learned what kind of life I could not live. I learned that dignity is not loud. It does not need applause. Sometimes it is just a man standing calmly behind a marble column while everyone else in the room mistakes quiet for weakness. And sometimes it is his son finally understanding that silence does not mean shame. Sometimes silence means strength.